Good evening and welcome to the Soil Association's annual general meeting. I'm Martin Nye, Chair of the Board of Trustees. Holding the AGM as an online event allows more of our members and supporters to attend. So we've actually had over 500 people registered. Plus we are recording the event to make it widely available. So online meetings have their advantages, but things can occasionally go a little awry, so please bear with us if we do have any technical glitches. Just so you know, everyone entering the event is automatically muted and you can't be seen on the screen by other attendees. There is a chat bar where you can say hello and tell us where you're dialing in from. We've had many people doing that already. Thanks to those of you who have already sent in questions in advance. You can also ask questions as we go along, so please post questions in the Q&A button. We will answer as many as we can today in the chat or later in the session. We've had loads of questions, so any we don't get to tonight we'll respond to when we send out the recording. So the agenda, after I've said a few words, I'll hand over to Nicola Spencer, our Group Resources Director, who will give an update on our finance and governance. She will be followed by Helen Browning, our CEO, who will share with you her thoughts on the extensive impact that we've had over the past year and tell you about our current Organic September campaign and also how her team at Eastbrook are using nature-friendly alternatives to synthetic fertilizers. Ben Raskin, our head of Horticulture and Agroforestry, will tell us about the benefits of farming with trees at Eastbrook and at Wood Oaks Farm, the farm that's owned by our land trust near Rickmansworth. And then Grace Dennis from the Healthy and Sustainable Diets team will update us on recent progress in the Food for Life programme in schools. After that, we'll have some time for questions chaired by James Cashmore, the Managing Director of the charity, before Helen closes the meeting. So it's been another extremely busy year, and on behalf of the trustees, I want to start by thanking all our staff for the commitment and professionalism that has ensured that our work continues to have such a broad and very positive impact. Our teams have worked hard to engage fruitfully with an extraordinarily wide range of people across the UK and wider afield: citizens, farmers and growers, foresters, producers, schools, other charities, local authorities, companies, civil servants and politicians, providing all of them with grounded, real-world, fact-based, evidenced advice about how to address the existential climate, nature and health challenges we all face. We've set some very challenging goals for the Soil Association as a group and for the individual businesses such as certification and exchange, and for all the programs such as Innovative Farmers, Sustainable Food Places and Food for Life. And we regularly ask ourselves, what more can we do and what is stopping us from having a bigger impact? Inevitably, it comes back to money. So I want to finish my few words by thanking all of you, our supporters, and to ask, if at all possible, that you continue or even increase the financial support you are generously giving us. We simply cannot do what we do and what we want to do without you. So I hope you enjoy the talks tonight and that you find them inspiring. Let me hand over first to Nicola, our Group Resources Director, to talk about finance and governance.
Thank you very much, Martin, and hello, everybody. Before I get into the detail of the finance, I thought I'd like to share with you a diagram of our group structure by way of background. So can I go to that slide? Thank you. The group is headed up by the charity, and then the charity owns 100% of 3 companies. The blue box is shown here. So the largest is Soil Association Certification, providing a range of organic and sustainable certification schemes. Soil Exchange is new, through which Soil Association Exchange is now operating, and I know you're going to hear a bit more about that in a bit. We've got then a small company, SA Sales and Services, which is used for some of our marketing income. And all the profits from those 3 businesses are donated each year to the charity. So the businesses directly support the charity's work. Soil Association is also the sole member of another registered charity, Soil Association Land Trust, which owns a number of farms, and you'll hear about one of them, Wood Oaks, a bit later. Our accounts, which you can find on the website if you want the full suite of information, covers the performance of the whole group, including the Land Trust, but it does provide some information on the charity individually as well. For most of my update, I'm going to talk about Soil Association, the charity, and the financial results for last year. So that's the year ending March 23. So next slide, please. So the charity's unrestricted income was 3.6 million last year, which was a decrease of about 15% or just over £600,000 compared with the 4.2 million of the previous year. Now, as you can see from this chart, donations, legacies, membership subscriptions and contracts all grew last year. And those sources of income are incredibly important to the financial sustainability of the organisation. So to all of you supporters, thank you very much for contributing to that. But there was a reduction overall, and that was largely due to a reduction in the donation from certification, which was unusually high the year before. And in fact, last year's figure was more like a return to normal. In the year before, it made a very large profit. Its income was growing, but also its expenditure was unusually low because of the way it was operating during the pandemic with less travel and so on. So last year, ending March 23, it was a bit more of a return to normal. That said, the company did perform well because it was in a very challenging environment with the organic sector in the UK under pressure and also the forestry business pulling out of Russia just before the start of the year. Next slide, please. So that unusually high donation from certification meant the charity made a surplus in the previous year. So it was the charity's plan that we would spend more last year as we used some of that surplus and invested in new business development within healthy and sustainable diets and growing our fundraising income for future financial sustainability. So you can see that expenditure went up in those areas last year. And that was planned. And we planned to spend more than our income last year as we used up that additional money from the previous year. So we were planning for a deficit. However, the very challenging environment last year with very high inflation in particular, causing core costs to increase more than we expected, did lead us to put some of that planned investment on hold, unfortunately. But we wanted to make sure that our overall expenditure was managed at an affordable level. So next slide, please. This is the unrestricted summary. So we did plan to make a deficit using the surplus from previous year. So as you can see, an overall net expenditure of £800,000. Now, I've been referring to unrestricted so far, which is the funds that come into the charity where we have quite a lot of flexibility. Has to be spent on something to do with our charitable objects, obviously, but within that, there's quite a bit of flexibility. But the charity also has restricted funds where the funder gives us very specific instructions for how we have to spend that money. Now, restricted funds are really important as they enable us to do some really exciting work. And each fund has to be managed very carefully in line with the donor's wishes. Can we click onto the next slide, please? But the overall bottom line of what happens in those restricted funds isn't as meaningful as perhaps when we look at the unrestricted funds. And there can be some really big swings from one year to the next. And that's because we often receive a grant or a big donation all in one go, and then we might spend it over several years as the project progresses. So some years we might get some quite big surpluses, and some years we might get some quite big deficits. And in restricted funds, that's not anything to worry about. So last year we did actually have quite a big deficit as we spent down on project money that we'd received previously. So what does all this mean for our reserves, which is the money that we held at the end of March as we moved into this current financial year? Now, this is looking at group funds now. So this includes everything, including the Land Trust. And that light green section, the biggest on the left, is funds held by the Land Trust. So they are restricted only for Land Trust. And the vast majority isn't cash or anything. It relates to the value of all the farmland and buildings that have been given to the Land Trust to hold in perpetuity, including Wood Oaks Farm. And then the orange section, the Soil Association restricted funds, those ones that have been donated or granted to the charity but not yet spent, where we've got not much flexibility over what we use them for. And then the blue ones are all unrestricted. So that's where we've got more flexibility in terms of what we're allowed to spend the money on. But the designated funds, they're not restricted, but they're not easily available to us. Mostly it's the value of our HQ building, Spear House in Bristol. And that building is needed very much for the organisation's operational activities. So it's not freely available. Also in the designated fund is £350,000, which is a condition of our mortgage on Spear House, that we have that ring fenced. And then we've got the free reserves, the blue bit at the top, which is kind of everything else. Now we've got a reserves policy, which the trustees review regularly, at least once a year. And at the moment, the trustees have calculated that we would aim to hold between about 850 and about 1.7 million 850,000 and about 1.7 million as free reserves. Now we increased that recently, but trustees decided that it was important, with the growing size of the organisation and inflation increasing our core costs, that it would be prudent to hold a bit more in reserve. But the charities ended the year within those parameters, and free reserves at the end of March was £993,000. Next slide, please. So the charity began this current financial year in a solid position, with free reserves at a desired level. But the current times are really challenging, and we are seeing many of our costs go up significantly across the organisation. We are also seeing a lot of our income streams growing. So there's some really positive signs that the organisation is going to continue to grow and will be able to invest in the future. But we have to plan really carefully to manage those two things. And we also have to really adapt, because it's a fast changing environment that we all find ourselves in at the moment. So to maintain financial sustainability and to ensure that we continue to have the very biggest impact that we can have with the resources available to us, we have to manage very carefully. But that challenge is massive. So thank you so much to all of you who continue to support us, as it is vital to our ongoing work. And that planning and adapting is ultimately the responsibility of our board of trustees. So you've already seen Martin, who's our chair. Who are all the other trustees? Next slide, please. So our trustees are all volunteers who give their time freely to lead the organisation, and we're very fortunate to have a very knowledgeable board with experience across a number of sectors and disciplines, including farming, forestry, health, marketing and finance. They each serve up to 3 terms of 4 years each, and we try to ensure that not too many all go at the same time. So we're getting a bit of a balance each year between the need for experience and understanding how the organisation works, and getting new ideas coming onto the board as well. We currently have 12 trustees, having said goodbye to Thomas and Seppi last year. And then we welcomed 4 new trustees. So Richard Allen, Dr. Tony Balance, Lauren Branston and Sabine Vandenbroek all joined us. The board has a number of subcommittees to help the trustees scrutinise some things in a bit more detail. We've got the Audit and Risk Committee, Remuneration Committee, and the Trustee Recruitment and Selection Committee, who's responsible for finding new trustees and also for increasing the diversity of our trustee board going forward. So that's it from me. I'm very happy to take questions at the end, but for now I'll hand over to Helen Browning, our Group CEO. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Fantastic to see everybody, see all these people flooding into the meeting, some old friends and new people as well. And like Martin, I kind of wish we were all together somewhere, but it does give us such a lot more reach to be able to do it online. So maybe one of these days we'll have a big party somewhere and all get to meet each other in the flesh again. I'm looking forward to that day. I'm just going to kick off to talk a little bit about some of the impact we've had over the last 12 months and some of our highlights from the year and some of our campaigns, as Martin said earlier on. So just kicking off with our first slide, which turns to some of the numbers. And I think they're quite impressive numbers. On this slide, you can see some of the reach we've had in areas around what I would call making life better for everyone, especially the most disadvantaged, through food. So our certification numbers, the confidence we can give to consumers through purchasing organic food, but things like My Food Community, where we've trained a lot of future food leaders, the number of people who have actually been touched by our get-togethers events over the last year. And now we have 94 sustainable food places across the UK, which is extraordinary. So really exciting to see these kind of numbers coming through. Next slide, please. Because you're going to hear a bit more about all of that from Grace later on. As well as doing lots of really practical stuff, we communicate widely as well. And that was one of our core missions given to us by Lady Eve, who talked about the need for us to deliver an informed body of public opinion. It's slightly easier in this day of social media, perhaps, to do that than it was in her time. And our reach through social media, you know, now 280,000 people following us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd like that to be 28 million, but it's still, you know, we're seeing growth year on year. Lots of people signing our petitions. And obviously we're talking to a lot of farmers and the public through our magazines. I'm going to talk a bit more in a moment about some of the work we've been doing with farmers, but this just gives you a bit of a taster of what I'm going to come to in a second. So now I just want to turn, if we look at the next slide, please, to some of my real highlights of the year. And it's always hard to choose just a few things to talk about, but I think at this time, there can be nothing more important for us to do than to play our part in forging a consensus with all other like-minded organizations and people about the way ahead. We really recognized this a year or 18 months ago as we could see the next election hoving into view, that it was just going to be too easy for those of us who are farming or concerned about the environment or worried about healthy food to be picked off by politicians. It's too easy for us to be divided by small little things. So we worked really hard with the RSPB to develop this consensus on the future of food, farming and nature. And we started to talk to lots of other organizations, and at Oxford farming conferences last year, we hosted a big session there where we brought together lots of organizations who all agreed to sign up to this consensus. They'd worked on it with us and they were keen to sign up. And those, you know, they stretch from, you can see it on the website, the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, the Nature Friendly Farming Network, Green Alliance, the Food Farming Countryside Commission, Sustain, and lots of farmers as well, all signing up to this common mission of the way ahead. So talking about things like how vital it is for us to break the dependence on agrochemicals, to regenerate our soils, to have responsible innovation, to have trade standards that actually don't undermine our farmers when they do the right things, healthy and sustainable diets, and how we all need to take responsibility for our environmental footprint. So that's been really exciting. And that campaign, that approach is still growing. We're still signing up more and more people. We were at Groundswell this year. We're signing up more and more people so that politicians know that there is real unity about the way ahead and we can't let them off the hook. Next slide, please. Last year, we celebrated 10 years of Innovative Farmers, and we celebrated that with, as it was then, the Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, on a farm in Cornwall. I think that this programme has been remarkable over the last 10, now nearly 11 years. We've given away £620,000 worth of funding, and it's amazing how small grants can have a really big impact. Easy to access grants that farmer groups can get hands on to do the good work supported by researchers. We've launched over 150 field labs across the UK on so many topics. We've worked with over 40 research institutions, and about 750 farmers have been directly involved in those trials, but we've communicated the results of those trials to many, many more. Tens of thousands of farmers every year hear about this research through Farming Today and the Farming Press. It's been a really exciting partnership, and I can't thank Prince of Wales's Charitable Foundation enough for all the support they've given this programme over the years. Next slide, please. My third big highlight of the year has been the establishment and growth of Soil Association Exchange. This is probably one of the most important things we're up to at the moment. And I'm super proud that we've gone from nothing, literally 2 years ago, to now this year piloting this approach of measuring environmental, social and animal welfare outcomes on over 400 farms. That equals 190,000 hectares of land, about 1% of the UK's farmed area. And that's just within the first 18 months of our operation. We've really dug deep into the science. We've got the best science panel you could wish for, advising us on how to measure and what methodologies to use to get the most rigorous results we can while being really practical and pragmatic and sensibly priced. So it's been a really extraordinary thing. We've just launched a free-to-use service for farmers. So farmers who want to pick up their own data can do that and use that. We've got a great app that farmers can use. So if you're a farmer, have a look at that. It's a really great approach, and we've got over 20 advisors around the country. As farmers get their data, they then can get advice as to how they can improve still further. It's backed by loads of really great corporates who want to see this stuff happening, who want a level playing field for measuring these important outcomes. So Lloyds Bank, Arla, ABP, Compass, M&S, Co-op, all are backing this approach. So really exciting progress, and I hope you'll track what we're up to, and we'll be able to share some data with you from all these from these farms over the coming years. Over 95% of farmers say they'd recommend it at the moment. So that's really fantastic. And then my fourth highlight, my last highlight, and again, this is a big topic, and Ben's going to dig deeper into the agroforestry element of this, but it's all our work on forests and trees. We're now certifying over 26 million hectares of forests globally in over 60 countries, and we're training the next generation of foresters and forest managers across the globe too, from Vietnam to Eastern Europe. And we brought a whole load of them to Bristol just recently, to over 120 people from all around the globe, to have a whole week learning together. Last year, we also published our regenerative forestry report. And this feels like a real breakthrough to me, because we need to learn how to manage forests better, not just for the commercial timber that they'll produce, but also for nature and for social outcomes. And so our approach, which is really advocating for continuous cover forestry rather than clear felling, for more natural regeneration, for more mixed species diversity within our forests, has gone down really well, and we'll be doing a lot more work in this space. We also want to help farmers to see the opportunity in managing the woodlands on their farms, seeing the commercial opportunities of actually managing those woodlands better, which will help nature and social outcomes too. And just 2 weeks ago, we hosted the UK's first agroforestry show at my farm here near Swindon. And Ben, I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a moment, but it was a really fantastic thing to be able to do. So just moving on now to Organic September. And it's a special Organic September this year because we're celebrating 50 years of certification. And Organic September is always the month where we showcase the really great products that people can buy and get behind. But this year, we wanted to do more than that. We wanted to engage people in an important issue, one that we've been working on for many years, but we're really doing an increased amount of work on it now. And that is the overuse of synthetic nitrogen. Next slide, please. This is a really overlooked problem by so many people. There is far too much reactive nitrogen in the atmosphere. And of course, nitrogen comes in all sorts of forms. It comes through our legumes. That's what we do on organic farms. We fix nitrogen naturally through leguminous crops. and through animal manures. But piling more nitrogen into the system through synthetic nitrogen is really exacerbating an enormous problem. And you'll see below some of the statistics here. So much of our particulate nitrogen pollution is coming from agriculture. There's more agricultural pollution in our rivers than there is sewage, even though sewage has hit the headlines over the last few years. And even habitats that don't receive any nitrogen directly are getting much more from the atmosphere than they should do. And that's really reducing biodiversity in those habitats. Next slide, please. So there's a real challenge here. Nitrous oxide is so much more potent, even than carbon dioxide, 300 times more potent. And we're burning a lot of fossil fuel too to make these nitrogen compounds. So if we don't address the use of synthetic nitrogen, we will have no chance of meeting our net zero goals. So this seems something that we really want to get government focused on in a way that they haven't been until now. Next slide, please. So organic farming can really help to resolve this, because as organic farmers, we have to be incredibly careful about not losing nitrogen from our system. I always get really cross when people talk about manures as waste products. If you're an organic farmer, they're absolute gold dust. We need to husband our nitrogen. It's the most limiting factor within our system, the factor that most often limits the yield of our crops. So we really need to look after it. We don't want it leaching into our rivers and streams. We really are asking government now to set targets so that we can reduce the use of nitrogen, support farmers to get off the sugar, as my father used to call it. He always used to liken it to sugar. It gives you all that quick energy, but none of the nutrition that we get from proper farming and the rotation of manures and legumes. So if we could actually switch away from artificial nitrogen, we would see a big drop in emissions over time, and we would help in the process of clearing up our rivers, one of the most important issues in lots of people's minds. So just finally, because I know I'm running out of time, we're doing all of this, of course, on all the farms we work with. And I like to think we're doing it at Eastbrook as well. And these few pictures just give you a little bit of an insight into how that works. For those of you who aren't spending much of your time on organic farms, you must come out to them more. So using legumes to build nitrogen, using animals to release that, to make it more available to our crops, and then growing healthy, productive crops like the wheat you can see in the bottom of the corner here. So I think on all of our organic farms, we're showcasing actually how this can be done, and hopefully giving more and more farmers an inspiration that actually we can get off the chemical treadmill, we can reduce massively our use of synthetic nitrogen, and we'll produce better, healthier crops and better, healthier people as a result of it. Right, I think that's my slot over. I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to dig a bit deeper into agroforestry, both at my farm and other places too. Thanks very much, and I'll see you later.
Thank you, Helen. So yes, so I think deliberate integration of trees into farming, or trees with farming. So historically, they have been separate in the last maybe 100 years or so. So as in a lot of sectors, we've had a polarization of trees and farming, and woodlands and forests happen in one place and farming happens in another. And for most farmers in recent history, I think trees have become a bit of a problem. There are costs, they've got to fell the hedges, they've got to drive around the trees in the fields, and they've lost the ability to see them as a value. And there's good reasons in some ways. There is less value in trees historically, but I think we've also forgotten the good that trees can do as well as the actual value in the timber or the product. So next slide, please. So what exactly it is, it could be a single tree in a field. It could be like this picture on the left where you've got arable crops growing in between rows of trees. There's grazed woodlands. There's lots of different things. I'll go into a little bit more detail later on. But what it essentially is, it's about making the best use of our free resources. Helen talked about capturing natural nitrogen, but we also want to make the most of the rainfall that comes, and we want to make the most of the minerals in our soil, and we want to make the most of the sunlight. And these effectively are free. Once you've got your land, you don't have to pay for these. And with climate change, we've got this challenge of everything becoming a bit more unpredictable. We get the same amount of rain, but we get more of it in fewer time. We had 4 inches over 24 hours, didn't we, in the southwest recently? And how you cope with that as a farmer is really hard, but trees can really help. There's one grower I'm working with, Andy Dibben at Abbey Home Farm, who now says trees are not a luxury, they're not an add-on. He said, I won't be able to continue to produce vegetable crops at any significant yield without trees in my system. So he sees it as an essential part of managing with this climate chaos. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the benefits of agroforestry. There's, as Helen said, we just had 2 days of talks on agroforestry, and I've got to try and compress it into 15 minutes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it from the farmer's point of view and a little bit from the sort of wider environmental public goods point of view. So for farmers, I talked about that maximizing the use of those free resources, and what that leads to in most diverse tree-based farming systems is an increase in productivity, typically of 30 or 40%. So it is a way of increasing yield without taking on more land and benefiting the environment at the same time. There's a huge benefit to animal welfare. This picture on the left, even a bare tree in winter can warm the ground and make it a slightly more hospitable place to be. Most of our animals, our farmed animals, come from woodlands or woodland edge. That's where they like to be. They like being among trees. There's even evidence showing that they're happier when they're among trees. So it's good for the animals, but it also means if they're shaded, for instance, they haven't got to spend all of their energy keeping cool or keeping warm in the winter. They can put that energy into putting on weight or producing more milk for us. So there's some real practical benefits there as well. There's a real advantage to soil health. So trees bring up nutrients from deep down in the soil and often then drop their leaves onto the soil. We can harvest some of that. We use quite a lot of wood chip at Helen's farm where I help manage the trees. So we're capturing carbon, organic matter that's being returned into the soil. And we can improve, we can increase organic matter, we can help fungal populations in the soil, and a lot of our soils benefit from having a higher ratio now of fungi to bacteria. When we crop and cultivate soil, we lose carbon, but we also lose fungi. They hate being disturbed, and we want to bring more of that back in, and trees really help that. And then I talked about this climate resilience, and for me this is one of the big ones. I think for most of us, if you've driven down the road in the 30-degree heat that we've been having, and you see these poor animals in the middle of these big fields with no shade, we have to be able to offer crops and livestock some protection against rain, wind, heat, all of this stuff that is only going to get harder. But it also potentially adds business resilience. The more enterprises you have on your farm, the more chance you've got that they won't all fail and that you'll get some income. So having that diversity, it makes it complex, it makes it more difficult to manage, but it does potentially give you some resilience. Next slide, please. Oh, hang on, I thought I had another one. That's fine. I'll also talk about the environment, but we can leave this picture on because it's quite nice. So apart from the benefit directly to farmers, there's a whole range of environmental benefits that having more trees in farming systems will bring. We talked about nitrogen in water. Helen mentioned that threat to our waterways. Well, actually, trees will help absorb some of that nitrogen as well as other pollutants in soil by improving infiltration deeper down into the soil. they improve the quality of our waterways, and there's lots of studies showing that. They also help to manage those extremes of rainfall, so that if the water is able to infiltrate into the fields, particularly with more trees on the uplands, we will see less flooding in those lower areas. And it will take time, but we've already seen at Eastbrook some changes to how water moves about in the soil, even after only 7 years of planting. The other thing trees can do, and this is particularly relevant around dairy buildings or poultry farming and pig farming, is they capture ammonia. So they're helping to reduce pollution that goes up into the air as well. And one of the things we put in at Helen's farm is this specific shelter belt to capture ammonia around the dairy buildings and the slurry pit. And then, of course, they do sequester carbon. And while I think there are risks if we focus entirely on carbon. There's no question that we need to be pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere, and trees definitely will help with that. And I mentioned fungi earlier, and fungi are also incredible at sequestering carbon, as much as the trees that they're growing under. So there's real potential both to mitigate and adapt to this climate change. So I thought I'd just talk about a few options for implementing. So Helen said we had this incredible agroforestry show a couple of weeks ago at her farm. We had more than 1,250 people came over the 2 days, which smashed our target of 1,000 out of the water. The atmosphere was incredible. Everybody was just Helen, I think, had 250 people join her on a farm walk, which is just, I don't know quite how they all heard her and managed it. But anyway, it was incredible. So we know there's lots of interest from farmers wanting to do this stuff. But it's hard sometimes to understand how to start, what to implement, what do I plant, how do I plant it? And often starting with what you've got is a good way. So if you look up at those two top left pictures, on the left is a worst case hedge, as you sometimes see around the place, flailed every year, supporting pretty much nothing. But actually, with just a change of management, you could have the one just to the right of that, which is providing shade, shelter, food for wildlife, and habitat, and all the rest of it. The one on the right, you might actually have an existing woodland, which, a lot of woodlands are suitable for some grazing. And again, you've got to be careful, and so timing is important to make sure you don't destroy the undergrowth. But a lot of our woodlands are undermanaged, and using them as a habitat for livestock is great, particularly if you've got soils that you can overwinter. And then, pigs, poultry love being under trees, and again, lots of evidence of the benefits to them. And then the one on the bottom left, the grazed woodlands, is a bit more open than the one on the right. A lot of forage species, so grasses and clovers and things like that, will grow very happily in partial shade. In fact, most of them prefer it. There's a study showing that a lot of them, even at 40 or 50% shade, grow better than in full sun. So you can have more grass and forage production as well as the trees. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to very briefly talk about what we're doing at Eastbrook and then at Wood Oak. So I manage the trees at Eastbrook Farm for Helen, as well as my role at the Soil Association. And we're focusing our planting at the moment on the 200 acres that Helen owns at the sort of lower heavy end of the farm. So this is heavy clay. It had just been grazed by sheep. We've now planted around, I think, around half of the 200 acres now with some sort of agroforestry. Climate change resilience is a big driver for Helen, as is animal welfare. We're aiming to be very experimental, so we're trialing lots of different systems. We've got the alley planting here, you can see in the background, but we've also got browsing blocks, which are aimed sort of densely planted willow and poplar, where the cattle will come and browse, almost like a paddock. We're trying roundels, which are these circles of trees protecting a central species. We're planting unusual species. We've just been harvesting our almonds, and we've got a decent yield for the first time. And trees that you might not think would survive in North Wiltshire on heavy clay, but who knows? They're doing quite well at the moment. So we're trialing lots of different stuff. We want to be experimental, and we want to be a demonstration farm. We're happy to share everything that goes well or doesn't go well, and to be a bit of a sort of centre for people to come and have a look at, which is why we were so delighted to host the show. Next slide, please. So Wood Oaks Farm, as Helen mentioned, Nicola, is one of our land trust farms we took over relatively recently. It's cut in half by the M25, so it's not necessarily in an area that you might think was very rich in wildlife, and it's been farmed fairly conventionally for a number of years. But we're continuing now. We started habitat restoration. We've planted over 2 kilometres of new hedges with 10 to 12 different species within that. And they've got these incredible bands of volunteers that monitor wildlife and plant trees and take photographs. I think they've recorded, I think, Rose, who's in the middle, who coordinates, I think, 130 species now of wildlife they've recorded, so bats and harvest mice and lots of birds and pollinators and predators. So it's really exciting to see the transformation happening at Wood Oaks. And we're also, there's a woodland there that we're putting in a new management plan, and we're putting in some alleys of productive fruit and nut trees. So there's lots happening there. So if any of you are driving around the M25 at any point and want to have a look, do stop in. It's got a footpath that runs right through the middle of it. It's a lovely walk. And I quite often stop there rather than going to one of the service stations. So yeah, do look out for it. So that's it from me. I think I've got one final just sign off slide. If you do want to get in contact with me, then that'd be great. And I'm going to hand over now to Grace, who's going to talk about the Food for Life in schools. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much. Hi everyone. My name is Grace Dennis, and I'm the local programme manager for Food for Life in Medway. But I'm here this evening, delighted to be here this evening to represent the Food for Life team as a whole, to tell you a little bit more about the work that we do with our schools. So if we could move to the next slide, that would be fab. Thank you very much. So Food for Life is a soil association programme which is amazingly approaching its 20th birthday, and our work with schools centres around a whole school approach to food. So what does a whole school approach to food mean? It means embedding and embracing a good food culture throughout the entire school experience. So whether that's pupils, to catering staff, to teaching staff, to senior leadership teams, getting families and the local community involved as well. And why do we talk about a whole school approach? It's so that we've got consistency, so good food that is served in the dinner hall is also learnt about during lessons and ultimately reflected in the daily life of the school. So that's what we mean when we talk about a whole school approach. And this approach fits into the Soil Association's aim that every child has at least one healthy and sustainable meal every day, setting the habits of a lifetime. And as we know, the need for promoting a healthy and sustainable food environment for children is a real priority. Pupils leave Food for Life schools able to grow and cook food and with an understanding of where food comes from, so the seed to plate or the farm to plate life cycle. And having lots of different people involved in Food for Life through this approach means that it can be sustained over time, and it really can lead to impactful long-term changes. And today I'm going to be telling you a little bit more about what this looks like in practice. But before I do that, just to set the scene, I want to show you a video which was produced from one of my fellow commissioned areas in Derbyshire. And the video highlights how the Food for Life programme has made a difference to 2 schools in particular. And this is their story.
We've done Food for Life Award now for 7 years. We've managed to successfully work through criteria from bronze into silver and now working towards achieving gold, which we're very close to doing. We're really proud of that as well. It's grown from a very small working group to quite a large party, and we're now fortunate enough to have a full-time TA who leads on horticulture. Food for Life has made a real difference across school. It's had quite a large and significant impact, particularly towards pupil wellbeing. Children are getting a little bit restless and they just need a bit of a break from the class. They can come out into the garden and just enjoy themselves, really have a nice time. It could be planting, it could be watering, it can be picking things, and then they can go into the cookery room as well and experience the full Food for Life aspect. So it could be the lettuces, then it goes into the cookery kitchen, and it just gives the children more options and opportunities to try a different range of foods really that they might not ordinarily try. The caterers work really hard to support all of our children's diets. We try and maintain a healthy lifestyle where we can for some of our children.
The benefit is that we're serving fresh food, and I think that the majority of us, we want to do the job and give the children a healthy meal. Some of them don't always perhaps have that at home, or don't have the sort of knowledge so they can ask about things and try different things, and you know that they're having a good meal. They start right from scratch with Matt, planting things. They see it grow, week on week, right through to that then they wash and prepare it. I cook it, and then they get to try it. And quite often it's things that they wouldn't try, but because they've sort of seen that process, they get to see it. And even if they don't like it, at least they've seen how it works and where their food's come from.
I suppose it all started when we knew that one of our local cluster schools was involved with Food for Life, and we could see the difference it was making for the children there. Getting the allotment was a big thing because we were trying to use our own school grounds, but to have that big space, and also working alongside other gardeners in the community who've been really passionate to support our children in being more interested in growing. We've been really lucky recently. We've been approached by some parents who recognised the difference it had made to their child's mental health by being outdoors and using the allotment. They wanted to buy something to help so other children could continue to have those experiences and improve upon it. And they bought us a greenhouse for the allotment, which is fabulous. So we're very excited about that. Food for Life, it helps you to map out and plan that journey a little bit better, and involving parents as well. And it's been fantastic to reach out and liaise with other schools and different types of schools. We've been working with a special school. So that's been really good for our children to meet up with other children and share their experiences.
So a message to any other school would be just give it a try. There's lots of wonderful opportunities out there for staff, for CPD as well, for pupils, parental engagement, work within the local communities. So yeah, definitely give it an opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed that video. For me, it's just a really lovely example of Food for Life in action and the difference it can make. So let me tell you a little bit more about how we work with schools as a Food for Life team. So on the screen here, you can see our Food for Life awards framework, and we've got food quality, food leadership and culture, food education and community and partnerships as the main 4 pillars. And we work with schools on a step-by-step and an individual basis to support them with each of these areas. And we do this in a number of ways. First and foremost, by offering one-to-one support and individualised support as well, because every school is different up and down the country. We also offer them a wealth of fantastic resources and expert training opportunities, which really do bring Food for Life to life. Schools progress through this framework, and really importantly, we celebrate their wins at each stage, and they can achieve foundation, bronze, silver or gold Food for Life awards, demonstrating all of their hard work and their commitment. And as you can see on the slide here, we've got a selection of schools up and down the country who have recently achieved their awards, and it's a really fantastic achievement. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Lovely, thank you. So Food for Life supports schools to prioritise food quality and promote school meal uptake, which safeguards children's access to a nutritious, balanced meal each day. And we work with schools and their caterers through the Food for Life Served Here scheme, whose accreditation demonstrates a commitment to serving food at lunchtimes, which is cooked from scratch using locally and ethically sourced ingredients. For example, some of the requirements at bronze level, so schools who are serving bronze level school meals, for them it means that eggs used are free range, fish is responsibly sourced and is MSC certified, and that the school meals are adhering to the school food standards. And at silver and gold, this then progresses to recognising caterers who source ingredients from local or organic suppliers. Food quality is just one of the fundamental elements of the work that we do with schools, and having served here accredited menus positively impacts pupils, local suppliers and catering teams as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So good food leadership and food culture brings the whole school community together, making food an intrinsic part of school life. And we work with schools around this element of food leadership, really to give Food for Life activity the best chance of success, and embedding it from the ground up. And we do this in a number of ways, but first and foremost, we really encourage schools to listen to pupils' voices and listen to staff voices and parent and carer voices. So we encourage them to set up pupil feedback groups, for example, and we give them lots of lovely resources and activities to use to do this. So it might be capturing pupil feedback on the dining hall environment, or even on the food that is served, or even capturing pupil feedback on how they might want to develop growing or cookery activities, and so much more. We also support schools to track their school meal uptake as well, to talk to their parents and carers and families about the school meals, maybe even invite them in during a lunchtime to see school dinners in action, or do some taster sessions at a parents' evening. And we also work with schools to support them to develop their school food policy as well. All right, next slide, please. Thank you very much. So Food for Life can enhance the school curriculum through linking growing, cooking and learning about farming and sustainability. And we link that to multiple subjects, so such as science, art, history, maths, geography, English, PSHE. There's so many ways throughout the curriculum that growing and cooking and learning about where food comes from can be drip fed into the curriculum throughout the school day. And teaching pupils to grow and cook their own food equips them with skills and knowledge that can have a direct impact on their health, and teaching them about where food comes from, whether that's locally or worldwide, and how food is produced on farms. This can always be linked back to the curriculum and in the classroom. And we offer schools a wealth of resources to support them to develop these opportunities in school, such as assembly templates or skills packs for staff. We've got so many lovely recipes that we share with schools as well, step-by-step cookery videos, growing calendars, gardening activities, seasonal campaigns such as the upcoming Cook and Share campaign, and so much more. Here at the top of the screen, for example, is a little girl taking part in Walsall's recent sugar swap campaign. So if schools are telling us, we'd like you to support us with a campaign on how we can talk to pupils, parents, carers, families about reducing sugar in the diet, we're also really happy to support them with that as well. We also work directly with the Country Trust to support schools to access farm visits. For example, one school I'm working with at the moment in Medway recently took their year 2s to see a wheat farm in June, and that's the picture you can see there on the right. And this school are off to another farm in October with their reception class to do some apple picking, some plum picking, and to meet the piggies as well. So for me and the rest of the Food for Life team, seeing the schools progress with cookery, with trying some growing, with learning where food comes from, it's always such a real joy. And if we move on to the next slide, I've got some lovely quotes for you. I won't read through these word for word, but just so you can get the gist. Luton on the left-hand side, they're a really urban school in the heart of a town, but on a weekly basis they take a group of pupils to go to a local farm, and this is a local farm that has rare breeds, but it also produces meat as well, and then they bring that learning back into school and back into the classroom. And then the other quote that you can see there on the right is from Oakland's. And they've just got a fantastic setup. They're lucky enough to have a teaching kitchen, and this year they've developed an allotment from scratch, and they've been doing great things. And they're now bringing produce that they grow on the allotment into the classroom or into the cookery kitchens, and they cook with it, and they progressively link this growing and this cookery through the curriculum. So the things that reception pupils are learning about might differ a little bit to what the year 5s are learning about, but it's all good. And they're just, yeah, like I say, doing brilliant things, which is really exciting to see. And if we move on to the next slide, I've got some more lovely photos for you. And this quote, I just love it, from one of my schools in Medway. Seeing the progress of our group, so since enrolling with Food for Life, has been the most useful. They wouldn't touch the food. Now they grow it, they cook with it, and they eat it. So that, in a few words for me, just sums up what Food for Life in schools can achieve. So if we could move on to the next slide, please, that would be fab. Thank you. So the community and partnerships element with our work with schools involves reaching out to parents and carers and the local community and sharing what they're doing and really celebrating their achievements. And we encourage our Food for Life schools to share their learning with the surrounding community so that the benefits of what they're doing around good food can extend beyond the school gates as well. So for example, schools could hold events which have got a food theme and they can invite parents in. For example, at the moment, we've just had harvest time and I know it won't be long until Christmas. So that's always a really popular time to hold food events or in the summertime as well, perhaps some community events. And we always encourage them to share what they're doing on social media or on their website or newsletters home, just to really celebrate what they're doing. Some schools even share what they're doing outside of the area that they're working in as well. So for example, in Medway, one of my schools have reached out to a school outside of Medway and they visited each other to share tips and tricks with their growing allotment. And then as schools progress through the award framework at gold level, schools can even get involved with selling their own organic produce to parents and carers, or they can invite local producers and suppliers in, maybe to be part of a school market or a school fair. Right, next slide. Lovely, thank you. So I really hope that that has given you some insight into the work that we do with schools up and down the country. And from my perspective, having worked for the Soil Association for about 18 months now, it's been so rewarding, really has, seen firsthand the difference that Food for Life support, the expert training and the wonderful resources can make to schools in Medway and beyond. It's a really exciting and positive programme which schools can really embrace and embed, and it does give pupils the opportunity to develop their skills and their knowledge, and it sets them up for good food habits for life. The next agenda item is Q&A, so if anybody does have any questions, please do pop them in the Q&A box, or alternatively, if you leave this evening and you wish you'd ask me a question or you just want to find out a little bit more about Food for Life and the work that we do with schools, my email address is on the slide there. But for now, it's time for Q&A, so I'm going to hand over to James Cashmore, our Charity Managing Director, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Grace. And one of the great joys about hearing from people like Grace and Ben as we have tonight is it just reminds you what's unique about the Soil Association and being unique from our foundation, that it's all about exploring these vital connections right across our food system from farm right through to fork. And in fact, it's those connections between the health of soil, plants, animals and people that really we believe will stand us in good stead today. So look, it's on to questions. We had a large number of questions that were submitted beforehand, so tough job to select, but I've got an initial few that I'm going to point at various members of our panel. So if you're ready, panel, this first one's for Helen actually, and it's about a topic that yeah, we're probably hearing more about in the news these days: regenerative farming. So here's the question, Helen: are organic farming and regenerative farming complementary or in competition?
Thanks, James. Well, actually, I'm really excited by the enthusiasm that farmers have got for regenerative farming. There's a whole wave of farmers who are trying new things, moving in the right direction, getting interested in soil, growing, using less nitrogen, a lot of them using a lot less agrochemicals. And so I think there's something really exciting about the way this is shifting people in the right direction. Now, there is an opportunity for greenwashing, and some of the corporates have kind of got on board and said, yeah, we're all going to be regenerative, and they haven't really said what that really means. So one has to be careful about that kind of thing. But overall, I think we really need to embrace any movement of farmers that really is as strong as this one, striving to get better. And I've already seen some farmers who've started to explore regenerative farming over the last 2 or 3 years, then turned to being organic. So I think this is a pipeline for us. I think we'll learn from some of the stuff that they're doing, because they're really digging deep into some of the soil science. They're trying new methods. So I'd like to think that we can really work collaboratively with regenerative farming, and a lot of them will be getting involved with things like soil association exchange as well.
Great, thank you, Helen. I hope that was helpful. Question that I'll try and answer next. Like these questions, what can people do more to help support the aims of the Soil Association? Well, there are lots of different ways, and I guess what we'd like to say is that whatever time you have, whatever money you have, there are ways in which you can support. So that could be just getting involved in our campaigns, signing up to our newsletters. We have a very loyal member base, many of whom have donated year after year. We'd love to grow that member base. Whether or not you can continue to give, whether you can increase your donation, and whether you could perhaps tell your friends about our work, those are all things that can help us. And finally, support our wider work on our aims in the world. So the things that you do, how you choose to eat, what you choose to, how you choose to live, what you choose to do. So clearly through buying organic, that indirectly very much supporting the aims and impacts of the Soil Association, as well as getting involved, spending time out in fields, understand what's happening in your local schools around food, and all of those different ways you can potentially connect. So yeah, lots of ways to get involved and support, both directly and indirectly. So the next one's a question for Ben, and a little bit more technical here. Ben, how can we persuade new allotment holders that it isn't necessary to dig deep in order to grow vegetables? I guess the idea being that all that digging does release carbon back into the atmosphere, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things I love about my job is I get to work at all scales. So and the principles are quite similar. So Helen talked about the regenerative farmers, and one of the principles of regenerative farming is to do less cultivation. And I think one of the things that organic farmers are learning from that is maybe how do we reduce our cultivation? I don't necessarily believe we should never plough, but we do understand, I think, much more the damage that cultivating can do. And similarly, when you're at a garden level, every time you stick a fork or a spade in the soil and turn it over, you're disturbing that soil life, you're releasing carbon. So the less we can do of that, the better. And there's increasing sort of expertise, I think, in terms of how to do that no-dig gardening. So Charles Dowding, who a lot of people will have heard of, who has quite a long association as organic grower and with the Soil Association, has sort of led the movement, perhaps. But using organic mulches and wood chip. I'm a bit of a wood chip obsessive, so don't get me started on that. But using effectively a layer of clean organic material that then you bring the soil into balance effectively, and you theory you get less weeds and an easier management of it. There's also, you can use green manures and cover crops and sort of plant directly into them. And again, we've got a really incredible field lab starting looking at reducing tillage and living crops in horticulture. So actually planting crops into living mulches. And that you can do, I've done that very successfully on an allotment scale as well. So planting courgettes into yellow trefoil, for instance. So yeah, lots of opportunities to do that for sure.
Great, thank you, Ben. And the next one, hopping right across the breadth of the Soil Association's work, is for Grace. So Grace, are there any plans in schools to teach children about food provenance and sustainability in the curriculum? So interested in how this curriculum is developing and what we can do to influence that.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I'm going to try and answer this question in two parts. So the first part is what is happening now. So something, as I alluded to in my presentation, that we do with Food for Life is to work with schools to weave this into different areas of the curriculum. We offer them resources to support with this. But as it stands at the moment, for secondary schools, for example, food provenance is woven into the curriculum, especially with their food tech side of things, and good practice is that pupils demonstrate this understanding of where food comes from through production and processing. So they're looking at a variety of ingredients and where these might be grown or reared, or processed, and they do consider sustainability and the impact on the environment as well. And I know this is woven in with geography as well. Whereas for primary school pupils, food provenance is taught through, I suppose, introducing them to food around the world and introducing them to different foods progressively, and the health links, such as labelling. I was working with a school earlier in the year that attended a farm visit, and they then looked at wheat and products in wheat, and then the labels on food. So it's very much kind of around those sorts of areas. But in terms of sustainability specifically, the second part of my answer, as it stands at the moment, I believe a key initiative for the Department of Education, Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy for Education is that by 2025, all education settings will have a nominated sustainability lead, and we'll have to put in place a climate action plan. So that's how it stands at the moment. So for me, schools that we're working with at the moment already so often weave sustainability and the environment into Food for Life. But the fact that this strategy is coming hopefully will ultimately complement the work that we're doing on the ground as well with our schools. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, thanks. And I think we have posted into the chat. If you want to find out more about that, the Food for Life work, do take a look at the links in the chat there. So next question's back to you, Helen. And yeah, this is a topic that does provoke opinions, doesn't it? Gene editing. So could you discuss the implications of the government's Gene Editing Act, and particularly, if I'm understanding the Act correctly, the sense that there may not potentially be any labelling for consumers in relation to gene-edited food?
Thanks, James. Yes, we've been very nervous indeed. That's an understatement about the changes on this front that have been mooted over the last 2 or 3 years, or since we left the EU, actually. And the news isn't good at all, despite a lot of concern being expressed by a lot of people, by the public. Very clear that they're still very nervous about GM technologies, which is what gene editing is fundamentally. There is a sense that they will move not just on plants, but on animals. And I think doing that without a really clear framework that makes sure that any techniques you use are going to drive you in the right direction, not the wrong direction, we should all be really worried about. The lack of labeling is a particular concern, I think, to consumers. And, it does mean for a lot of people that the only way they probably will be able to guarantee buying foods, if they want to, that are free from gene editing is by choosing organic. And that shouldn't have to be the case. There should be that choice for consumers. We should be labeling. I wrote to the FSA, the Food Standards Agency, last week, who are looking at this issue, reiterating our and many other people's concerns and fears over this. But I feel it is a very, very difficult mantra to row back from now. Government seems absolutely set. This is the course they want to take.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, and there are opportunities to have your say. So if that's something that you have an opinion on, do search into gene editing into our website. We can be saying a little bit more about it and give you an opportunity to make your voice heard on that. So a question that I'll pick up again, and this is one we referred to Wood Oaks Farm in Nicola's presentation earlier on. So farm not far from the M25, just northwest London, if you like, not far from Rickmansworth, that was gifted to the Soil Association Land Trust not long ago. I'm fortunate enough to have been able to visit. And the question here is, are you going to renovate the tithe barn and farm buildings at Wood Oaks Farm? And the question comes in from someone actually who who obviously knows the farm. Sorry to see a recent shot showing its sorry state, where my family used to work in the barn and on the farm when we lived there. So very much lovely of you to join. Thank you very much. And there is some good news which you may have picked up, but possibly not, because it's quite recent, and is that we have received now a development grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund just in the last week or so. A development grant of £200,000 to create a community asset at Wood Oaks, including renovation around the barn and the buildings then around the barn, which you might know of. And that's a fantastic opportunity for us to turn Wood Oaks into a genuine community asset for that area, but also to showcase, particularly because of its location, showcase our work. So we're delighted about that, and thanks very much to the Soil Association team of mine that have played a big part in that. We have a few more questions, and I think we just about have time. We'll probably take two more in the 2 or 3 minutes that we have remaining, and then I'll hand back to Helen. So Ben, it's back to you for a question on agroforestry. So you spoke to provoking a lot of interest these days. So what's being done to guard against soil erosion in the light of more severe and heavy rains expected in the future? So yeah, feel free to talk about agroforestry or indeed about anything else in relation to soil erosion specifically and climate change. Obviously a great threat.
Yeah, so clearly it is a great threat, and agroforestry certainly is one of the things we can do. I think there's actually a number of things. I quite often quote a visit that I did to a grower down in Devon about 10 years ago, I think, and he was on this sort of very rich sort of Devon red soil, and the week before had cultivated his fields to sow carrots. And to sow carrots, you need to create quite a fine tilth. So you plough, you power harrow, you possibly power harrow once or twice, depending on the soil. So he'd done quite a lot of damage to that soil, because that's inevitable if you're growing carrots commercially. And the week after, when I was coming to visit him, we had a downpour, absolute deluge. And we were driving down his track, and the water was red and muddy, and he was panicking because he thought, oh my God, I've just come and done this to my field, and now I'm losing it all. And we got to his gate, and there was nothing coming from his field at all. It was all coming from a field opposite that had not been looked after properly. And for me, that was so powerful. He was looking after his soil so well. His structure was good, his organic matter was good, he had a good rotation. He was using cover crops that actually, even when he had to do that sort of damaging bit of the rotation to grow carrots, it was still fine and resilient. And I think that for me was a massive lesson. So, protecting soil as much as you can, leaving it bare, almost for the shortest period, just when you're sowing crops. I've talked about this living mulch idea and sowing and planting directly into living mulches, and I know Helen's doing some trials on that as well. There's a lot of interest in that, but it's tricky in our climate because it's hard to control. Things grow very quickly. We're warm and wet, so anything that you don't want, it's quite hard to control that and have the bit that you do want. But trees, I think, are increasingly being understood to be part of that picture. And Stephen Briggs, who's pioneering agroforestry farmer over in Cambridgeshire, his main motivation for planting trees was to stop his soil blowing away into his neighbour's field, because he's on this very light fenland soils. So we know that they slow winds down, they reduce erosion, both from wind and from water. So I think they're crucial, but I think they're not the only thing we can do.
Great, thanks, Ben. Well, look, we're hard up against it from a time perspective. There were 1 or 2 questions that came up during the evening in the Q&A. So I think we have answered a question about the Restore Nature Now campaign. So yeah, we'll be at the Bristol and the London demonstrations tomorrow. This is in response to the State of Nature report that around 60 or so environmental and conservation organisations have contributed to, and it's published, been published today. So do take a look out for that. worrying declines in wildlife species across the UK, and we have some comment on that. In fact, I think we may well be on one of the news channels this evening speaking about that. But do take a look at that. And we've also, I think, answered a question that came up on biodiversity net gain. So do have a look at that answer. Tim is in the chat there. So I think that's probably just about what we have time for, other than all we have time for, other than me just to hand back to Helen to wrap up the evening.
Thanks, James, very much. And thank you all for sparing an hour and a half on a Wednesday evening. It's a Wednesday evening to be with us. It's a real pleasure to hear your questions. We will make sure that we feed back the ones that we haven't actually got to cover during this session. Really great questions, always really stimulating to know what you're all thinking about. It's a big year ahead, lots and lots going on. The political scene is going to be very complex, so we'll be really have our work cut out over the next 12 months to try and make sure that the big messages about what's important for the future land with all parties going forward. It's going to be a really, really important time. It couldn't be more crucial. And then when we have a new government in place, trying to make sure that in their first period of time that we can actually get in front of them with the solutions that they need to implement and to show how practical and popular those solutions are. So again, as James and Martin have said, just really want to thank you for being with us, for supporting us, for helping us do that work, get behind our petitions, get behind our work, and help us amplify our voice. Coming up quite shortly, in the next month or two, we've got the Peter Melchett Memorial Lecture. So I hope some of you might be able to join us online for that. Again, we'll be recording and sharing that. We've got Caroline Lucas, as she steps down from the Green Party, giving that lecture for us this year. So that's going to be a fantastic opportunity to dig deep into some of the politics of what's going on right now. So do try and join us online for that, or we'll share the recording with all our members afterwards. So that's all I really want to say today. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for being members. Share the news about the work that we're doing. That would be the biggest gift you can give us, is to tell a friend, get more people involved, and continue to share with us your thoughts and views. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your evening, and good night.